Today, we are tracking 9 stories where the central question is cost. President Trump moves to stop Iran's nuclear program, but says it outweighs American economic pain. Meanwhile, the U.S. and China meet for high-stakes talks on trade and AI. House Republicans expand pressures on millions relying on Medicaid and SNAP. We cover the Supreme Court's deadline on mifepristone and a new lawsuit alleging an OpenAI chatbot contributed to a fatal overdose. And over $2 billion in education grants are being held back by the White House. Plus, Ukraine's renewed strikes on Russian energy and a critical fire weather risk in the Midwest. Who benefits from these decisions? Who carries the cost? Let's find out. Hello, and my name is Jared Urain, and this is the Spectrum for Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. The goal here is simple. We're going to deliver the facts and connect the human impact. So let's get started. Trump says stopping Iran's nuclear program outweighs Americans' economic pain. President Trump made that statement this week that Americans' financial struggles are not a factor in his decision-making as he tries to negotiate an end to the Iran war. When asked how much Americans' financial situations motivated him to reach a deal, he said, "Not even a little bit." The White House says the president's responsibility is the safety and security of Americans and that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is the confirmed position. The administration is saying the nuclear security goal comes first. But this matters because the Iran war also connects to energy prices, shipping risks, inflation pressure, and household budgets. April inflation was already running hot. Energy prices were one of the major drivers. So the question is not whether national security matters, because of course it does. The question is how leaders explain the cost of national security decisions, especially to people who are already paying more for gas, food, rent, and debt. If you are hearing this story outside of this channel and it's on the right hand, let's say, of center sources, you might hear it framed as a strong leadership that refuses to let Iran get a nuclear weapon. But this can miss the responsibility to explain who pays for the economic costs while policy ends up playing out. On the other side, if you're hearing things from the left of center sources, you might hear it framed mainly as indifference to working families. And that this perspective can actually miss the genuine security concern that nuclear risk is not an ordinary budget dispute. So what is confirmed? Well, we know that President Trump's objective is to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. That's the only motivation that is focused on. He also indicated that Americans' financial situation is not in his perspective as far as balancing that decision. And the White House backs that up as a safety and security issue first. On top of all of that, official inflation data is showing energy prices were already elevated and a major driver of April's economic increase. What is not yet confirmed, though, is whether or not the U.S.-Iran negotiations can produce a durable ceasefire. Can Iran negotiations also produce an actual nuclear agreement? What are the energy and shipping or inflation effects from the Iran war? It's also unclear if households will see sustained gas pressure or really what security concessions either side will make. So what is the human impact on this story beyond the spin of other news outlets? Well, the concern here is that a national security decision can show up as ordinary people are paying more before they actually understand the strategy. A parent with a long commute might feel the war first as a high gas bill, a smaller grocery budget, or another credit card balance that just does not get paid down. A small contractor, a delivery worker, or even a rideshare driver might have no way to pass along fuel costs without losing customers or income. The people absorbing the first economic hit are often not the people in the room deciding how long this conflict continues. A tragedy for many. So why does this matter? Well, we need to pay attention to things like Iran talk restarts, any stalls, or even a collapse altogether. Those will have a direct impact on how far and how long this economic pain will last. Oil prices, gas prices, shipping costs, inflation expectations, all also are indicators for us to pay attention to. If a ceasefire or some sort of nuclear framework emerges soon, well, the pressure on energy markets might actually ease up. Households might get some relief soon. Whereas if talks fail, or if the conflict ends up widening even further as it has been, fuel and shipping costs could keep feeding into inflation and delay the early relief. If leaders do not explain the trade-off clearly, public trust may erode even among people who agree with this security goal. So the practical question here is this: when a foreign policy decision affects your bills, what explanation does the public deserve? If this conflict is affecting your gas costs, your business expenses, or even your household budget, would you mind sharing what that looks like in the comments for us? We'd love to be able to have some dialogue around this. You can also join me during the live conversation when we go live, because security decisions are national, but the bill often arrives locally. The United States and China are preparing for a high-stakes meeting in Beijing. The main topics include trade, Taiwan, Iran, and technology competition. Few observers expect any major breakthrough, but both governments say that they want stability. That matters because the U.S. China relations are not an abstract diplomacy. They affect tariffs, they affect prices, rare earth metals, semiconductors, farm exports, factory jobs, even Taiwan's security. It can even reach the cost of goods families buy every day. Now, if you are catching this news update from right of center sources, you might hear it framed as toughness towards China or winning the AI race and protecting national security. But that can miss how tariffs and supply restrictions raise costs for consumers and small businesses. If you're catching this from the left of center sources, you might hear more about diplomatic risk, Taiwan anxiety, or Trump's unpredictability. And that, of course, can miss the real security and technology concerns that both parties in Washington now share. So what is confirmed so far? We know that Trump and Xi are preparing to meet in Beijing. The topics are going to include trade, Taiwan, Iran, and technology as central issues. But the expectation is to expect no major breakthroughs. What is not yet confirmed, though, is will any sort of trade deal will be announced, if there's any tariff extensions, rare earth agreements, or if Taiwan ends up being a major part of the discussion. In addition, the question stands if China will play a meaningful role in Iran's diplomacy. If any sort of deal is established, whether or not any sort of enforcement can be held against it. So what is the human impact, especially beyond the spin from local news outlets? The concern here is that a summit between two presidents can become a price change, a delayed shipment, or even a job decision for people who never follow diplomacy. A small business may have to raise prices, delay inventory, or eat the cost if tariffs or export controls tighten. A family might see the effects months later in appliance prices, school electronics, car repairs, or interest rates that are tied to a broader uncertainty. The people that are most exposed to the consequences usually have no vote in the negotiating room and no control over any sort of retaliation. So what can we do about it? Well, we can pay attention to whether leaders extend the trade truce or restart tariff escalation. We can watch rare earth exports and semiconductors. But keep in mind, many of these observations don't help us in the everyday cost of living. If the summit produces some sort of narrow stability agreement, Markets and supply chains might get breathing room, but it doesn't really solve the deeper conflict. If talks break down, and tariffs and retaliation could feed into consumer prices and business uncertainty down the road. If Taiwan becomes the central flashpoint, well, the economic issue could become a security crisis very quickly. The practical question here is, are leaders reducing risk for ordinary people, or household spending has been affected by tariffs, by imports, or supply delays? Please feel free to share those comments in the chat below. Our third story here is about Ukraine and how they've resumed strikes on Russian energy targets after a U.S. broker ceasefire ended. Reuters is reporting that Ukraine resumed drone attacks on Russian oil refineries and ports after a 3-day ceasefire expired. Russia says it intercepted and destroyed hundreds of Ukrainian drones overnight. Russian regional officials reported fires near an industrial facility and a gas processing plant. Officials also reported no casualties or injuries in one of the incidents. The confirmed point is that, and that matters because energy systems are not just military targets. They fund governments, they move armies, they power homes, and they employ workers. They can also affect fuel of markets. If you're catching this from right of center sources, you might hear it framed as a Ukraine striking Russia's war machine. This can certainly miss the escalation risk and civilian exposure near facilities, energy facilities. If you're catching this from the left of center or anti-war sources, you might hear more concern about the ceasefire failure and escalation. That can miss the fact that energy revenue helps fund Russia's military campaign. What is confirmed so far is that Ukraine has attacked Russian energy targets, and Russian officials report that drone debris caused fires in Krasnodar and Astrakhan regions. The Russian authorities also reported no casualties or injuries in that fire. What is not yet confirmed, though, is the full damage to Russian energy infrastructure. Ukraine's official operational count might differ from local Russian and regional defense statements. It's also not yet clear whether energy exports, processing capacity, or fuel supplies were materially disrupted. It is unclear whether the strikes will trigger retaliation against Ukrainian cities or infrastructure. So what is the human impact beyond the spin here? Well, the concern is that infrastructure strikes can turn a distant war into fuel risk, power risk, and safety risk for civilians. Refinery workers or nearby residents might experience the strategy as simply sirens, fire, smoke, missed shifts, or closed roads. They're always living in fear of another strike. Ukrainian families, on the other side, might face retaliation through drone waves, power cuts, or disrupted transport. These are human beings living through war. Even though it's been 5 years, they still have to deal with the tragedy of this stress. The people living near energy systems carry the danger, while leaders describe the targets in strategic language. So what can we do about it? Well, paying attention and being concerned about these is one place to start. But we can also watch whether or not these strikes can create measurable damage to refining ports or fuel supplies. We can see whether Russia retaliates against the Ukraine civilian infrastructure. And if the energy campaign expands, well, both military financing and civilian energy systems become more exposed. Those costs might carry over into other systems breakdowns. If damage remains limited, the attacks might be more about symbolic pressure than market-changing disruption. Whereas if retaliation intensifies, the human costs can move quickly from facilities to homes, hospitals, schools, and power grids. That affects everyday humans, and if you have family or friends that live there, those are concerns that everyone needs to deal with. The practical question here is, when energy becomes a weapon, who is protected and who's left living next to the target? House Republicans are pushing major Medicaid savings as part of a larger tax package. The medical proposal includes new work and eligibility rules. Republicans say this is about reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. Democrats warn millions could lose coverage. At the same time, Reuters reports that House lawmakers are proposing tougher work requirements for SNAP, the food aid program that serves more than 41 million Americans. The SNAP proposal would require more adults without disabilities or dependent children to work 80 hours per month. It would also push more cost responsibility onto states. The actual news is that the safety net story is now bigger than Medicaid alone. Health coverage and food aid are both being reshaped through work rules, eligibility checks, and state cost pressure. Work requirements can sound simple, but the real outcome depends on paperwork, deadlines, and transportation, maybe even employer verification, disability exemption, state staffing, and whether people can prove what the rules demand. If you're hearing this report from right of center sources, you might hear it framed as work, fraud control, and taxpayer fairness. But that can miss the ethical question of whether eligible people lose food or care because they cannot prove compliance fast enough. On the other side, if you're hearing this from left of center sources, you might hear it framed mainly as cruelty or benefit cuts. And that can miss the legitimate public concern about program integrity, state costs, and fair rules. So what is confirmed so far? Well, we know that House Republicans are pursuing Medicaid savings as a part of a larger tax package. The Medicaid proposal includes new work and eligibility criteria. SNAP proposals would tighten work requirements and limit states' abilities to waive them during high unemployment. This would affect approximately 41 million Americans who rely on SNAP. What is not yet confirmed, though, is the final bill language, the exact number of people who would lose Medicaid, SNAP, or both under a final package. In addition, state-by-state administrative costs and implementation capacity remain fully unclear. It's also not clear whether moderate Republicans will force changes or whether budget scoring will alter the package. So what is the human impact beyond the spin? The concern here is that benefits policies can become a paperwork test that costs people food, care, time, and wages. A low wage worker might meet the spirit of a work rule but still lose benefits because hours change or an employer form is late or an online portal does not update. A parent or caregiver may have to miss a shift or pay for transportation, to gather documents, or sit on hold to keep food aid or health coverage active. The people least able to absorb the missed paycheck are often the people asked to spend the most unpaid time proving eligibility. So how can we deal with this? Well, we can pay attention to the committee processes and updated budget scores. Watch whether SNAP or Medicaid work requirements stay paired inside the same tax package. We can pay attention to states because they would carry much of the administrative burden. If stricter rules stay in the bill, coverage and food aid losses may come from paperwork failure as much as ineligibility. If moderate Republicans reduce the cut, the tax package may need a different funding source. If states take on new costs quickly, the burden may shift to local offices, food banks, clinics, and families. The practical question here is this: are these rules catching fraud, or are they catching people who cannot navigate bureaucracy? If Medicaid, SNAP, food banks, caregiving, and disability support or hourly work affects your household, please share the process and what that actually takes. The policy debate is abstract until the people living in the paperwork are heard. The Supreme Court has left access to mifepristone unchanged until at least Thursday. That means that patients can still obtain the medication through pharmacies or by mail without an in-person doctor visit for now. This is temporary, though. It's not a final ruling. The case stems from a challenge to FDA rules for prescribing the medication. The practical issue is timing. A court order can affect whether patients can use mail access, pharmacy access, telehealth, or whether they need an in-person visit. If you're catching this from the right of center sources, you may hear it framed as FDA accountability, state authority, or abortion restriction. And that can miss the immediate patient care issue, that someone might be making a medical plan under a imposed deadline that's out of their control. If you're hearing this news story from the left of center sources, you might hear it framed mainly as an attack on reproductive rights. And that can miss what the order actually does today and what remains legally unsettled. So what is the human impact beyond the spin? The concern here is that legal uncertainty can turn medical care into a race against time. A patient may need to rearrange childcare, transportation, time off work, or pharmacy pickup because access rules could shift within days. A provider or pharmacist may have to pause, verify, or reroute care while trying not to violate a moving legal standard. The people living the uncertainty pay in time, privacy, stress, and delayed care before the legal systems reach finality. We can pay attention to what the court's action is before Thursday. We can also watch whether mail, pharmacy, telehealth, or in-person visit rules change. If the court extends the pause, current access continues while the broader legal fight proceeds. If restrictions take effect, patients may face more travel, fewer access points, and tighter scheduling pressure. If the court narrows the ruling, practical effects may vary by state and provider. The practical question here is, can people make medical decisions safely when the rules may change tomorrow? If you are affected in your care, your clinic, your pharmacy, or if someone in your family is dealing with this, would you mind sharing what that uncertainty looks like and feels like in real life? These are real issues, and we want to be able to have a conversation around it. The legal debate is national, but the scheduling problem, that's personal. Reuters is reporting that the parents of a 19-year-old who died of an accidental overdose sued OpenAI and CEO Sam Altman in California state court. The lawsuit alleges the young man used ChatGPT for guidance on combining drugs. The suit claims the chatbot encouraged him to take Xanax for nausea caused by kratom. The lawsuit says the combination of Xanax, kratom, and alcohol led to his death. These are allegations. They have not been proven in court. OpenAI called the situation heartbreaking and said the interactions happened on an earlier version of ChatGPT that is no longer available. This matters because millions of people ask AI systems health-related questions every day. The question is not whether chatbots should exist. The question is what they should refuse, what they should redirect, or escalate when users ask about dangerous drug combinations, self-harm, medical decisions, and crisis situations. If you get this information from the right of center sources, you might hear it framed as big tech recklessness or even elite immunity. But that can miss the evidence questions. What exactly was asked? What exactly was answered? And what safety systems were in place? If you're catching this news from the left of center sources, you might hear it framed mainly as a case for AI regulation. And that can miss due process and the challenge of building safety rules without blocking useful support. So what is the human impact beyond the spin here? The concern is that casual health questions to a chatbot can become dangerous when the answer sounds confident, but the situation is medically risky. A teenager or a young adult may ask a question at night, alone, without a doctor, a pharmacist, or a parent, or even a counselor in the loop. A family may only learn after a crisis that has a digital tool. A family may only learn after a crisis that a digital tool became part of a medical decision they never knew was happening. The people paying the highest cost are families living with loss, while companies, courts, and regulators debate product design afterwards. This matters because it affects real life opportunities that people have at their fingertips right now. Let's pay attention to whether the court allows the case to move forward, whether OpenAI releases more details about health safety guardrails. Let's watch whether regulators scrutinize ChatGPT health before wider rollout. If the case uncovers clear harmful evidence, let's watch pressure for AI health safety rules if they increase. If OpenAI shows stronger safeguards now, the debate may shift to legacy models, warnings, and user education. If courts treat AI health responses like product guidance rather than speech alone, the whole industry could face new design duties. The practical question here is, when people ask a machine for health advice, who is responsible for keeping the answer from becoming dangerous? Do you use AI for medical, mental health, or medication questions? Would you mind sharing what you thought about the actions that the answers you received? Or what about the guardrails that should be there? The goal here is not to create panic. The goal is to create a safer health environment before a crisis takes place. China is criticizing a U.S. chip equipment bill before the Beijing talks. China is pushing back against proposed U.S. legislation aimed at limiting Chinese chip makers in the global AI race. The bill is called Match Act. It is expected to come up during the Trump-Xi summit. The bill would pressure allied countries to withhold more technology from China, which could make it harder for Chinese chip makers to produce AI semiconductors. China has criticized the legislation and prepared possible responses. This is not a technology story. It is a supply chain story. Advanced chip-making tools shape who can build the most powerful AI systems. But export controls also affect companies, workers, allies, and downstream prices. If you get this from the right-of-center sources, you might hear it framed as winning the AI race and blocking China's military rise. That can miss the cost of retaliation and the impact on U.S. firms that sell tools, parts, and services abroad. If you're catching this from, let's say, the left of center sources, you might hear it framed as dangerous escalation or tech nationalism. Now that can miss the real concerns about military use, surveillance, and strategic independence. So what is the human impact beyond the spin? The concern here is that an export control fight can become delay, a price increase, or a job risk from Washington or Beijing. A factory worker might feel this as a slowed order or changed shifts, uncertainty about whether a plant has the tools it needs. A consumer might feel it later as more expensive phone, car repair, appliances, or medical devices. The people whose jobs and purchases depend on the chip supply chain rarely get a simple explanation of what restriction caused what cost. So how can we manage this? Well, let's pay attention to whether the Match Act makes advancement in Congress. China's response during or after the summit to the Match Act. We can also pay attention to what the allied countries say, especially ones that control key chip equipment supplies. If the bill does advance, U.S. technology tensions may sharpen and retaliation risk might rise. If the summit softens the dispute, chip supply chains may get temporary breathing room. If allies resist U.S. pressure, the U.S. policy may be less effective and more diplomatically costly. The practical question here is, are technology controls reducing danger or moving costs into the economy in ways the public cannot see? Education Week reports that the White House Office of Management and Budget is withholding more than $2 billion Congress approved in February. The money is for more than 30 K-12 and higher education programs. The affected funds includes education research, teacher preparation and training, community schools, and magnet schools. The money cannot be spent until OMB releases it to Education Department accounts. Some of the funds may not need to go out until later this year, but the delay is already raising concern because schools plan ahead. They hire, they train, they contract, they plan summer programs, and then they design the student support, and they cannot plan confidently around money they cannot access. If you're hearing about this report from the right of center sources, you might hear it framed as executive oversight of programs, especially ones that the administration wants to eliminate. But this can miss the legal and practical issue that Congress already approved the funding. If you're hearing this from the left of center sources, you might hear it framed as an attack on public education. And that can miss the need to specify which programs are affected, when money is legally due, and where disruption is actually taking place. So what is the human impact beyond all this spin? Well, the concern here is that the delayed federal money can become delayed hiring, delayed training, or canceled support long before families understand why. A school may postpone a teacher training contract, after-school partnership, a research project, or a community school service because the funds are approved but unavailable. A parent may not hear about apportionment or OMB, but they may feel it as fewer program slots. They might feel it as a delayed service or a staff member who cannot be hired on time, or cancellation of typical programs. The people closest to students often spend the most time managing uncertainty created far above the school building. So how can we help? Why does this matter? Well, let's pay attention to whether the OMB releases the money or continues to withhold it. Watch whether districts begin warning about delayed timing, training, or program slots. Tune in to the district superintendents and their messaging tied to those funds. If funds are released soon, schools may absorb the delay with limited disruption. If delays continue into planning deadlines, districts may scale back programs even without a formal cut. If the administration uses apportionment to slow programs Congress funded, the precedent could affect other public services. The practical question here is, when Congress approves education money, should local schools be able to plan on it? I think the obvious answer is yes. If your school, child, teacher training program, or community service depends on federal grants, please share what uncertainty goes into planning. The National Weather Service says scattered severe thunderstorms are possible across parts of northern high plains this afternoon and this evening. Severe wind gusts are the main storm hazard. Gusty winds and low humidity are also creating critical fire weather conditions in parts of the northern Great Plains and Great Basin. This is a public service story, not political framing. The priority is location, timing, uncertainty, and practical risk. The national alert is only the starting point. If you are in an affected area, follow your local National Weather Service office, emergency management, local outlets, and office alerts. The concern here is that severe weather becomes dangerous when people do not receive local information early enough to act. A wind event could mean a downed tree, a blocked road, or a school pickup problem. A power outage can affect others using medical equipment. Fire weather can put ranchers, outdoor workers, drivers, and rural families at risk before a small ignition is even widely reported. The people with the least flexibility are often the people most exposed when warnings arrive during work, school, or travel. So pay attention to the National Weather Service as well as your local outlets for the latest news updates. If you are affected by any sort of disruption and you'd like to share your story, please drop those in the comments or join me on the live chat when we stream again. Well, that is today's Spectrum. The thread running through these stories is cost. the cost of conflict, the cost of trade tension, the cost of paperwork, the cost of legal uncertainty, the cost of unsafe technology, the cost of delayed public services, and the cost of weather risk when people do not get clear local warnings in time. The question we keep asking is simple. Who benefits from the decision? Who carries the cost? And who's missing from the coverage? If one of these stories touches your life directly and your experience, add your experience in the comments or join the live conversation when we go live, because facts matter. But people are where the facts land. My name is Jared Urain. This is The Spectrum. Thank you for watching.